This is the America First Patriot Podcast. Defending freedom and liberty is our motto. We put God first and politics second. This is part 2, the takedown of the military with Colonel James Hutton. I want to apologize for the technical difficulties that I caused. In the prior show, we're going to have another hour. So as long as that's okay with Mr. Hutton, we will continue. We left off talking about how China is trying to control all regions around the world. Again, Jim, I apologize, and thank you for coming back on.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Jim, we left off talking about China buying a property in America and about the politicians allowing it to happen. We talked about China going to Taiwan, the Philippines, and trying to, influence all parts of the region for their control. If you don't have anything else left to talk about China, we can go into Russia if you like, unless you want to share more about China. Jim, can you hear me? Jim? Jim, can you hear me? Okay, we lost Jim. I don't know what happened. I guess he couldn't hear me or I couldn't hear him. So hopefully he'll come back on. So please stand by. Again, Jim, are you there? Jim? Jim, can you hear me? Your call dropped before, so I don't know how come I can't hear you. What's going on now? Please stay. Okay, Jim, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yes.
Jim, yeah, you're breaking up. Is it your end? You're having some internet problems?
I don't think so. I'm actually switched over to just a regular phone, so it'll be better.
Oh, absolutely.
Not going through my computer now. Yeah.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah. That's much better.
Okay.
I don't know if you heard me. Did you hear me earlier talking about China and where we were at?
So we were. No.
Okay. All right. That's okay. That's okay. We were talking about China influencing all the regions across, the globe, and we left off talking about China buying a property in America near military facilities, and of course you covered, the Philippines. I mentioned Taiwan. I mentioned Jamaica. We mentioned Australia, the region there, and the South Pacific. If there is not anything else that you want to cover with China, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, we're going to dig deeper into China next week. But so what I'm trying to do is set the background for the world we live in illustrating why a diverse and physically diverse, that is weaponry diverse, military we need to have to face the very real threats that exist. So in China, I think we've covered it for now. And in Russia, of course, they've done their own thing. And, after Afghanistan and our departure there, Russia understood that was the time for them to act and cross the border into Ukraine. And they're kind of mired in the attack in Ukraine. They're not losing, but they're not winning, at least not enough for their own purposes. So, and the other problem with Russia, of course, is they're in close cahoots with China. They've become what used to be just the opposite, in that they are the junior partner for China, They need the weapons.
Yes.
They need the sales of their oil. They need the sale of all their other goods, and that makes them a problem. They also have a very big army. We don't know how good they are at expeditionary operations, but they obviously can fight for a long time with lots of weaponry, and they've got nuclear weapons, as we know, and lots of jet aircraft, and so they are a constant problem, and they are obviously antagonistic against the interests of free countries and international law and all that, and they don't feel all that bound by any of that. So they're going to continue to be a problem. They're not the old Soviet Union, but they sure do want to be. And that's a problem for us, considering several of their republics from the old Soviet Union are part of NATO. And he really would like to put together the pieces of that old Soviet Union again. And so that's got to be something that we worry about and think about, because, you know, any attack on a NATO nation would spark Article 5 of the NATO agreement, and, you know, an attack on one is an attack on all. And we do not want to be in a ground war with Russia. It never goes well for anybody, including the Russians, but they seem to be more willing to lose a lot of people, as they have in Ukraine. And, of course, North Korea is even the junior of the junior partners, and they also may have some nuclear capability. None of that's 100% clear, but they don't seem to have any fear of the process of the United States or its allies. They don't have any fear of doing testing and building up their military even more. Now, they've got lots of problems. Any country that is that tight of a dictatorship has lots of problems internally that we can't see so easily. They have starving people internally. They have no money for a lot of the stuff they actually need to keep on living, but they are continuing to build that military. And then of course, we've got Iran, which is the source behind Hezbollah in Lebanon, that is attacking on a constant basis Israel, the Houthi rebels, as we talked about, in Yemen, and of course Hamas itself. They also saw that same sign that the green light was there for them to go, because they didn't think the United States would be involved enough in defending against them. So they also are a nation that is actively seeking nuclear capability, and that would be horrible for the region, because there are other countries not too distant from them that potentially have nuclear weapons too, and we don't want to see two countries, no matter where they are on Earth, get into a nuclear fight. It just would be a horrible thing on a scale that we can't really comprehend. So
I have a question.
It's against
Jim.
that backdrop. Excuse me?
I have a question.
Sure.
How, I apologize, it's going back to Russia for a second. We continually import oil from Russia? Why do we import oil from Russia?
Well, there's one thing that we've done, and that is like not cut our ability, but limited our ability to create our own sourcing of oil and other fuels that are right there under our ground. As President Trump has said recently, it's liquid gold right below our feet. And we certainly we're trying to limit that under the Biden administration, because he wants everything to be electric, and even though there's no clear path to getting to all electric, and so we're suffering for that. And people want their oil. The Europeans want their oil, and Russia's got it in abundance too. And that's where a lot of it's going to keep coming from. Just one of the realities that we're dealing with, but it's self-inflicted on our part.
Right. Exactly. We have created most of our problems, and that's the saddest part.
Yeah. If we're self-sufficient in energy, that limits the the ability of our enemies or potential enemies from operating freely throughout the world, and it gives them pause at what they would be up against should they continue to poke at our American interest. And we have interest in the region, especially their region, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, Japan, Philippines in particular, and some of the smaller countries as well, even the Solomon Islands that I mentioned earlier. All of those nations are important to us. That's what they're trying to flip. The Chinese are trying to flip, and of course the Russians are in on that game as well. And we've got to continue those relationships. And now I know it's kind of growing popular to say that we need to get out of the world and get back to taking care of our own. We do need to take care of our own, but it isn't. Our world exists. The American economy exists not just within the confines of the United States. We sell our products around the world. We've got worldwide interests. Now, some of those interests we should probably be cutting back on, but at the same time, we are involved in the world, and we can't just put our head in the sand and say nothing's happening outside. That has been done before. There were a great many people in 1938, 37 who said we should have no involvement in Europe. It won't affect us. It's not going to affect us. But then, Japan changed our thinking on that, and of course, the next day, a certain German leader declared war on the United States, and we were in it whether we wanted to be or not. We want to prevent that kind of thing from happening again. And a strong United States is the best defense we've got. Before World War II, we had an army of about 100,000. It was a very small cadre kind of army. Fortunately, we had some good American leaders in there like Dwight Eisenhower and Patton that enabled us to get that machine going in time, but we don't know what the world is going to look like, and so we needed 16 million men to be in uniform for that war, and we probably could have, if we had a much stronger army at the beginning, probably could have been ended a lot faster than that, and that's what we want. We don't want a fair fight. We don't want an even playing field. We want to be ahead in everything we can be, and we know we have worldwide interests. So anyway, but our military is suffering a bit. We've had lots of problems. The Army and the Air Force have not met recruiting goals, and the Navy have not met recruiting goals for the last couple of years. Now, one of the solutions is in the Army is that Army Recruiting Command will now answer directly to the Secretary of the Army, a woman who has zero military experience, and the Recruiting Command will now be commanded by a 3-star general instead of a 2-star general. Now, I fail to see how that addresses the problem, but we do have a problem. Only the Marines, which is a great fighting force, as we all know, and the U.S. Space Force met their goals. And the Space Force, while it's a very important force and they do great work, they're not on the ground defending our borders and jumping into hostile situations. That's not what they do. So it's very dependent. We're very dependent on a very active and large and able Army that's nimble enough to go anywhere on Earth at any time, and that's a problem. And the Navy, of course, they state they have a goal of 350 ships by 2049. Probably need 100 more than that. I'm not a naval expert, but right now we have about 293 deployable ships, and it's probably not enough, but you can't have ships and not have the personnel that man those ships, and that's where we're at right now with the Navy. So we've got some problems in recruiting, no question about it. Now, here's what DOD says the reasons for that are. That there's a real strong economy, and I don't know exactly what economy they're seeing that says it's a strong economy and has a lot of options for young people. That they're saying that's one of the reasons. There's a smaller eligible population, and that part is accurate. There are a lot of American youth that are not able to be in the military. They're either overweight or they can't pass physical tests or educational testing, and you've got to have a force that can actually do the job when they get there. So that is a problem. The Gen Z people have a lower trust in the institutions, the military, the government itself. They have less trust. Well, the way you build trust is you have strong leaders at the national level, and well, I think we know where we are on that. And
right.
and also that same generation is following less traditional career paths. COVID has been some cause of that. It's changed people. Just working in an office is different than it ever was before. So that still has to be worked out. And then because we have such a small percentage of the military that of the population, there are fewer and fewer people who have family members who have served, which decreases the propensity to serve, because a lot of people follow the path of their parents, and there's a lot fewer of them now. Again, our Army secretary, has said that she doesn't really want generations after generation from the same families in the military. This is crazy talk. I don't know where this comes from, but it won't solve the problem. So, I would add to that one reason, and that's these multiple deployments of the same personnel over and over again. You just look at World War II, and it was about 3.5 years of our involvement, right? Now there were some men that were in it for a long time, but we literally have soldiers in our Army that have spent 6 or 7 years in combat zones. 6 or 7 years. So that's double the length of World War II. Some people have served 5, 6, 7 tours, and I mean tours of a year or more. That's wow. Worrisome, and we're seeing it especially in our general officer ranks, because, for example, when the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan started, some of those guys were majors and lieutenant colonels, and today they are 3- and 4-star generals. Well, they did 3 or 4 tours as a major, lieutenant colonel, and now they're doing the same thing again as general officers. Now, our involvement right now is a little bit less, so maybe that the force can take a knee and take a deep breath, but we can't count on any of that. The force needs to be ready to go when they're ready, when they're needed. And so, now we're already seeing things like this heightened security alert in Europe. We went to what we call ThreatCon Charlie, which is the second highest threat condition. And what that really means in a nutshell is that an incident is very likely to occur, a terrorist action, and that they're aiming these actions right now on our military bases, which are not a whole lot of bases left in Europe, but that means they think there's a very real threat. ThreatCon Delta, which we've gone to one time in my whole life, was on 911. So that gives you an illustration of the severity, next higher level. Yeah, and so that only happens when we've actually been under attack. So this is a very troublesome thing, and I'm glad that our intelligence is significant enough that we can detect it. But guarding against it's very tough, because you can't always get inside the head of the people that are going to do these attacks. So we have to redouble our efforts, and again, we're doing it with troops that have been deployed, smaller force, smaller Army, smaller Navy. It's smaller Air Force, for that matter. We have fewer planes than we've had in history. And it says we say that the Air Force is going to divest 250 aircraft in 2025. and we're going to shrink below 5,000. Well, that will be the lowest level ever in the modern Air Force. I don't know how that's considered a very positive thing.
Jim, I have a question.
Yeah.
Does our military compare our needs as well based on other countries, like China's Navy, Russia's Navy?
Yeah.
What are their numbers? I mean, I'm sure they're significant more than ours at this point.
Well, certainly the Chinese Navy is certainly bigger, and their land force is bigger. Again, we don't know how good their forces are. They haven't really had any combat actions since 1979, and there's a reason that the Chinese are operating on all the different channels: diplomatic, information, military, and economic power. They see those as all part of the big fight, and we've got to see that as part of the big fight too. It's not just bullets and missiles. It's the whole thing, and that's where they're engaged. But they do have a huge military, and as the Russians used to say in World War II, there's a certain quality and quantity. And the Russians threw tanks, even though they were not as good as German tanks. They threw tanks and tanks and tanks, and they didn't run out. And that eventually exhausted the German forces that were in their country. And so there is that dynamic that's at work too for China and Russia. But for us, taking away our biggest weaponry assets like aircraft is a real problem. And here again, let me back up a little bit more and just give you in thinking of our president. When he went to the World War II cemetery for I guess it was Memorial Day. Mm-hmm. He said that here's what he said: what American president would ever say Nazis coming out of fields, carrying torches, singing the same anti-Semitic bile, carrying swastikas were fine people? Now, that's Biden's allegedly quoting from Trump. So his mindset is in this place that didn't exist, because as we now know, that whole "they're both fine people" was a intentional misleading quote from President Trump. So this is where his mind is on these issues. And he also said that President Trump said that he didn't want to go to a certain battlefield when he went to Europe because they were a bunch of suckers and losers. Again, everyone that was there said no, and they're saying this one general said that he said that. Why would he say that? He was over there. Why would he say that there? That doesn't even make any sense. So
exactly,
he's not even concentrating on the things he needs to concentrate on.
Right, and Trump fired that general, by the way.
Yeah, and who knows what was the basis of that? But nobody else heard it in the whole delegation. So. And it doesn't make logical sense that he would have even said that anyway. Why would he have gone if he thought that? Why would he have even gone to Europe? So
right.
It just doesn't make sense. But we've got to live with the facts of the world, and the facts of the world is that China is orchestrating this historic modernization. And they want to exploit our weaknesses, and every country has weaknesses, and they want to take advantage of that. Putin's thrown Europe into a war, and it looks like he's in for the long haul. Iran and its proxies are thrown into a war, and it looks like they're in for the long haul. And North Korea is doing whatever it's told by China and Russia.
I was getting ready to go to North Korea. I says Kim Jong-un is like a kid in the candy store testing his missiles. Like, he could do whatever he wants. And, we know that Putin recently visited Kim Kim Jong-un. And I guess they're also looking at my notes that we're supplying them, North Korea is supplying Russia with weapons.
Right. Which tells you something about where Russia stands in the whole scheme of weaponry. But they've still got enough of everything to be a big problem for everybody and for anyone. And they've got a leader that doesn't mind sending his troops off to their death in big numbers. You know, what other leaders in history can we say that did that? And, well, we come up with a few names, and they're really dangerous foes. You know, even though I think ultimately not any of those countries singularly can defeat the United States on the battlefield, I don't think they can, because our industrial base is just too great. And the potential for the force in the future always lends itself to a free country being better off. And that's us. But I don't want to test that. And, you know, we've often heard that maybe we don't have the youth that is willing to fight. Now, that's not what I saw in Iraq. Every time I went to troop units all around the country, I was lucky enough to be assigned to a general officer who commanded troops the whole time I was there, all 3 different tours, over 3 years worth. And these generals constantly went out to troop units. And what I saw were highly motivated, smart guys, dedicated to the mission. So I'm not afraid that our forces, the troops that are there, are falling apart. I'm not afraid of that. I'm afraid of programs being inflicted on them that amount to social experimentation. And and some of that includes, like, the COVID thing. We kicked out a bunch of guys who refused to take the COVID shot, and it turns out they were, you know, there was something to that. And so we just lost soldiers for what turned out to be no reason. And that, you know, that in itself doesn't make sense. Why would we do that? Now, I know they've offered to take some of them back, and they have rescinded that policy, but geez, the damage is done.
Didn't they get court-martialed and they got
they
dishonorable
didn't court-martial them. They didn't get dishonorable discharges. They administratively discharged these soldiers that wouldn't do that. But yeah, they didn't get dishonorable discharge. It's really hard to get a dishonorable discharge. That is like murder and rape and that kind of stuff. So they weren't those kind of offenses. But still, they were kicked out. These are guys we need, you know. We need the guys that can actually pull the trigger and fix the helicopter and drive the truck. We really need those guys. And that's what we're kind of low on right now. And I don't know that the department is focused enough on the recruiting that we need, the weaponry that we need, and the long-term vision for the military. That's what was the problem with when Obama was president. He very slowly, inch by inch, diminished this, diminished that, cut back on maintenance, cut back on training, cut back on bullets, cut back on everything. And before you know it, you've got a much weaker army and it's totally unnecessary. This is the kind of thing that we need to be able to do all the time, anywhere on Earth at any time. And again, it's not really an option for us to say we're just going to stay out of all the world's problems. It's just not possible, especially given our status in the world. We've chosen to be the most powerful nation on Earth. We have the biggest economy still, despite China's growth. And none of these economies, the European Union, the Chinese, if suddenly there was no America, the world would plunge into a irreversible, probably, depression, because they need us and we need them, and we need to be able to defend our friends, and we need to be able to defend ourselves. You know, some of that starts at home, like with the border. We've talked about that, but some of that still plays in. I'm looking at the time. I think we've gone over the 8 o'clock hour.
If you have something to do, then it's no problem. We can cut it if you have something to do, because we're going to talk next week about China.
Right.
So
right.
we just put in 45 minutes plus the other 15, and I put the title on this one as part 2. So for people listening to this one,
well, I'm sorry.
For people listening,
I've committed to something else here. So
no. Listen, I appreciate your time. I apologize for the delay, and I'm looking forward to having you on next week, talking about China with you.
Absolutely, and I can talk to about China if maybe you need to add some time. I'm kidding. All right.
Okay. Again, thank you so much, Jim. We'll touch base during the week, and you have a good evening. Good night now.
It's always good talking to you.
You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
For those that are tuning in, you're listening to America First Patriot Podcast. Defending freedom and liberty is our motto. We put God first and politics second. We are honored and proud to have in the studio retired Colonel of the U.S. Army, James E. Hutton, talking about the takedown of the U.S. military. We have accomplished a lot today. We're going to have him on again next week, and we're going to talk about China for the full hour. That's going to be a very exciting show. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for your support and following us and on all the social media platforms. We appreciate it. Next up on Monday, we're going to have former U.S. congressional candidate Darren Aquino, who may consider running for public advocate in New York in 2025. We're going to have him up. We're going to talk about New York. We're going to talk about the nation, and we're going to talk about Florida with Darren. So thanks again. You guys have a wonderful and blessed July 4th. Have a safe one, and we'll talk soon. God bless you all. Good night now.